Did everyone have a great time yesterday? Yeah. I know I certainly did. It's great to have so many smart folks who are passionate about driving change and innovation all in the same space. And open spaces, right? It's a great opportunity to keep that conversation going. And really, I think what it all comes down to is we're looking for ways to implement and drive this change in our organizations. And the great part is many of the people in this room right now have the answers that we're looking for. So don't hesitate to tap someone on the shoulder and seek out that help, because there's somebody here who can help you introduce DevOps, automation, and some of the practices we're talking about at this event in your org. So with that, I'd like to welcome Michael Ducey. He's going to be taking over from here. Please join me in welcoming Michael.
Thank you. So I just wanted to introduce Courtney. So I met Courtney about a year ago, and where did I meet her? A very odd place. She works for Nordstrom, as you might have saw by her bio. I met her at Target Corporation, of all places. Like, not at a Target store, like we weren't like shopping. Sounds wrong, right? No, like at Target HQ in Minneapolis, right? And she had become, she was invited to come and speak to Target to share how Nordstrom had changed parts of their organization and had been going through a DevOps transformation, and Target invited her out to speak and share her story. So what I find really super interesting, and one of the reasons why I wanted her to come, is because, you know, we kind of have a little bit of retail here in Columbus, a little bit. I mean, we have a whole town called Wexley, right? And so I wanted her to share that story because I see this transformation go on and over again in the retail space. And so having a retailer come and talk to other retailers, I thought would be really, really good. So take the time and listen to her story. It's really good, and I'm really excited to invite Courtney Kissler up to the stage when she's done talking to Warner.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for being here. I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to talk about kind of the Nordstrom journey and also share some case studies where we've been applying DevOps within our technology organization. And I think I'm going to put this in here, see if it works. If I can, so I don't have to hold it, maybe. All right. Is that okay? Okay. All right, so just a little bit of background on Nordstrom. We think about our business in kind of two ways. We have our full price business, which includes all of our stores, our full line stores, and our digital properties in the full price space. So we've got Nordstrom.com website, we have iPhone, iPad app, Android app, anything that is mapped to our full price business. Then we have our off-price channel as well. So those are our Nordstrom Rack stores, and our digital properties are NordstromRack.com. We have a Nordstrom Rack app, and then we also have a business called Hotlook that we acquired a couple years ago, and it's a flash sale business. The other acquisition we recently made is Trunk Club. So that is a styling service that you can use online. We just recently rolled it out to women as well, so you can go on and say, you know, these are the kind of styles that I like, and then a stylist will help you get a trunk sent to your house, and you keep what you want and send back what you don't want. On the right-hand side, I was trying to kind of talk about where technology plays into this space. We're considered a key enabler across a bunch of different dimensions. One is around flexibility. We, probably not shocking, we've got a lot of monolithic code base in our environment, and we need to figure out how to service enable that and move faster. Our digital experience is not where we want it to be. It's more transactional. So we're trying to figure out how can we bring the Nordstrom in-store experience really into that digital space and bridge that gap. Our stores, on the other hand, are not as convenient. If you go in and you want to do something simple, it's not really set up for that. And then speed, which will be a big dimension that I'll talk about in a little bit, and improving our reliability. So this is kind of where I'm going to go. I'm going to go fast through the first two because if you get a chance to watch the DevOps Enterprise Summit presentation, a lot of this content is the same, so I don't want to repeat it. And I really want to get to the case studies because I think that's where it's really powerful to see kind of how we're making this happen within the organization. So at Nordstrom, we've got a varying degree of teams and people kind of in different stages along the journey. We call it modernization because it's across a bunch of different elements. For us, we spent the last 2 years really hiring in thought leadership around engineering. We were highly contractor-based up until that point, so we didn't have a lot of full-time employees that were writing our code, so we've kind of flipped that in the last year and a half. And focusing on cloud and microservices, really defining what does that strategy look like for us, and then in some cases we've actually done some implementation in both of those spaces. Really moving to on-demand releases. This is a new concept for us in shipping product, very project-based until a few years ago, and figuring out a way to not have technology be the constraint for delivering value. And then using metrics. We don't have a lot of that going on in our organization. We're trying to figure out a better way to use data to make decisions and really have that be the driving force. So I'll go fast through here. Not all teams are at the same pace. Our web team kind of goes across all these dimensions. We have teams that are called our run-ahead teams that are really moving things to the cloud, CI/CD, microservices, on-demand releases, and then we have a traditional release cycle still, which is one of the case studies I'll talk about. Our store team, very similar. They're in a couple different phases. And our customer mobile team, I actually talked about them at DevOps Enterprise in 2014 because they're our unicorn within our enterprise, and they've really adopted all of these practices, and they're in the run stage, but they also know they're never done, and so they're constantly learning and improving along the way. So our need for speed. So in 2014, we were having conversations about how do we get more productive. And there were a bunch of different opinions about how we could accomplish that. You know, some people jumped to, oh, well, we should just save money. That would make us more productive. Luckily, we had had about a year of work that we were doing around lean. We had done some value stream maps with some teams. We had demonstrated that if you take that approach, you understand your lead time and your cycle time, and you problem solve, you get more productivity, you get speed, you get reliability, you get quality, you get output. And so we were able to leverage those activities to kind of flip the conversation over to, let's focus on that. Let's not take our traditional methods for trying to be more productive or save money. And so that led to, we actually set a target for 2015 of reduction of cycle time by 20%. So for us, cycle time is from the time a developer or engineer can pick up a backlog item, start it, and then get it into production. So it really doesn't include all of the work that happens prior to that with our business teams to get it ready. It's really from pick it up and then deploy. And we picked that on purpose, and Carmen talked about that. If you optimize for certain parts of the value stream, you might not get the best bang, but for us, it was something that we could control. So we thought if we start there and we can demonstrate that we can make progress, then we can start to extend it out further. So this is where we were at. We really didn't have cycle time measured in many of the teams. Our mobile team was pretty much the only one that measured it, and even in the case of them measuring it, it wasn't really visible. They knew it, but we couldn't really make it visible across the organization. So our target was teams can measure it and it's visible, and then we can actually take some experiments through and see if we can make reductions to cycle time. This is actually a picture of the visibility board that we use to manage through the target condition and the current condition. We use the coaching kata and go through, and each of the teams has a leader assigned to their cycle time goal. And we huddle around this board once a week, and we ask the questions, what's your target condition? What's your current condition? what are the obstacles in your way, and then how can we help? And the list of countermeasures that we're leveraging, I already talked about making cycle time visible. Value stream mapping is one way that teams are getting a better understanding of what problems they should solve. Cascading Hoshin, this is new for us. We leverage A3X, and we use that for prioritizing all of the work that are in the teams that I support. So I support most of our customer-facing engineering teams. We actually have a stack rank list. We do the same thing for this so that we make sure that we are working on the highest value priorities and that we have the capacity to do it. Continuous delivery, probably not surprising, and microservices. So you can't fix what you can't measure, so probably not surprising that we started with that. This is an example of one of the teams and how they're measuring monthly, basically. So they capture their cycle time actuals against the target every month, and then also their output. So we define output as pretty much any backlog item that hits the team. And we're working through how to be consistent with that definition across the board, but it's just a way for us to have at least visibility into what the teams are working on. And Carmen mentioned yesterday, like managing variation and looking at things that cause interesting patterns in this data, where you have potentially, cycle time goes down, output goes up. That's a good thing. But when you have things like cycle time going up and output not going up, it causes us, or it gives us the opportunity to then say, let's go find out why. All right, so this case study I actually did share at DevOps Enterprise too. It's a mainframe example because last year when I talked there, I talked about customer mobile and I talked about our restaurant team, and I got some feedback that getting some examples that aren't like the unicorn example, the mobile example, and maybe something that was a little bit more legacy. So this is a fun story. At one point in my career at Nordstrom, I'm coming up on 15 years there, I supported this technology team, and they're accountable for all of our HR and finance applications and kind of anything that is related to like paying commission to our employees and managing applications that are used by some of our employees in the stores. So every year during our annual planning cycle, annual planning, yep, still do that, we would have a conversation about this application. We'd say, this is the year we're going to move it off the mainframe. It's got to happen this year. We got to get it off the mainframe. It's old, and we're going to do it. And then we would never fund it, and we would never prioritize it. So this year it came up again, and we said, okay, well, we're not going to get the funding, and we're not going to get it prioritized, so why don't we try a value stream mapping exercise, and maybe we'll come up with a problem that we can solve that it doesn't really require any capital funding or investment, and we can just make this thing better without moving it off the mainframe, which again was the assumption. And once we went through the exercise, we really realized that at the very front end of the process, which again, Carmen mentioned this yesterday too, the very front end of the process, we were asking for information that the salespeople didn't have. And so we ended up creating this, I joke because it's really not an iPad app, but we put the data entry component onto an iPad, which, let me back up. So not only did they not have the information, they actually had to leave the sales floor to submit the information. They had to go in the back room, use a PC, and they would just never get around to it. So all this data would just either be stale or it wouldn't get entered in a timely way. So we put it on the iPad. Now it's accessible to the floor, and we stopped asking for the information that they didn't have because they didn't have it. And so it was just like, it seems so simple, but this thing's been around for years, and this back and forth was happening, and it just took us getting deeper into the process to understand it. So this is a visual of, prior to the first experiment, it could take up to 7 days to actually get the data right. So they'd submit it, it'd go to a central office, they'd kick it back, and then they'd like kick it back for 7 days, and then finally figure out what they needed to get access to. We thought we could get it down to 1 day. It's really down to it's near real time because they're just doing it as they need to, and it's not even taking up to a day anymore. This is another fun data point. So prior to introducing the iPad app, there would be up to 50 data discrepancies a month. We put the app in, and in June we had 3. July we had a spike. That's our anniversary event month. It's a big sale event for us, so we hire a lot of like part-time employees, so not surprising. And then we went back down in August. So now I'm going to talk about our store team. So this team is accountable for any technology that is in the store, from POS to our clienteling app, our mobile fulfill app, because we fill orders out of the store, online orders out of the store. So prior to them deciding to adopt DevOps, we had a whole bunch of different silos. We had a development team that did all the feature delivery. They handed it off to the production support team. They supported it. We had our operations teams and all of our infrastructure teams. Like, everyone was in a different part of the organization. And our production support team for store was kind of the entry point for development. So you would go in there, you'd earn your stripes, and then you'd move to development. And it was basically like everyone in production support was planning their exit strategy. Like, how fast can I get out of this? Because I'm on a hamster wheel. I'm constantly getting called in the middle of the night. I do not want to be part of this. And they had a bunch of bugs in their backlog. They had 8 people supporting over 50 different applications. So it was really hard for anyone to go deep on anything, because they had to be, accountable for all these different apps. And there were morale issues. And we really didn't have visibility to any of our reliability metrics either. So what's fun about this story is that a bunch of leaders didn't just get in a room and say, we're going to do DevOps. We actually brought the team in and said, how can we solve for this? Because this isn't sustainable. Our quality's not good. We need to figure out how to adopt some different practices so that everyone can feel good about the work they're doing. So the team actually self-organized. They split up into those 8 teams. They took all the applications and redistributed them across the board so that they could be more product focused. And then they started figuring out, how can we get some good instrumentation and some metrics so we can understand basically our current condition. And the feature developers, they went into the on-call rotation. Imagine that. And then we also brought infrastructure resources into the teams too, where appropriate. So we have some of the infrastructure teams that are fully dedicated to our store technology delivery, but they sit in another part of the organization. So we actually brought them closer to these teams too. So that's probably a little hard to see, but essentially our availability and reliability for this year has gone up significantly due to these changes. We're still not where we want to be, but we've made a ton of improvement. And now we've got the teams that build the apps, own the apps, and improve them. We have one backlog, so that was another thing. Features and bugs were prioritized differently by the business, and sometimes they didn't even give us any sort of priority for bug fixes. So it never made the cut. And so we put that into one backlog, and we took our bugs down from 1,300 to less than 50, which was a big win. So we had a bunch of stuff kind of under the tip of the iceberg that never got addressed. And we have all these different variations of incidents, and there were some that were kind of under that umbrella that were never getting addressed. Well, now the team has time to do it. And we have now the ability to measure those apps independently, so the teams can own the metrics across the board. This case study is about our web team. So I mentioned that we were in kind of a hybrid state. We've got the run-ahead teams that are doing on-demand releases, and then we have our traditional release cycle. So today, well, not today because we've made improvement. Prior to kicking off this value stream, it was a 5-week release cycle. 3 weeks of dev, 2 weeks of what we call hardening, which was supposed to be stabilization, but it was never stabilization. It was always catch up on the dev that actually didn't get done in the first 3 weeks, do all your testing, including performance testing. Like, let's do that all at the end, because that's a really good way to operate. And so feedback loop was it was not where it needed to be. And we also had these exceptions. And so if you ended up getting into hardening and you didn't finish your development work, we'd trigger a piece of paperwork basically that would say, I need an exception to continue coding through hardening. And it always kind of made me laugh because it'd come to me to approve. I'm like, oh, I'm not close to the work that's happening, so I'd like rubber stamp it. And then when we did this value stream map, we found out that, well, that wasn't adding any value. We'll start with that. But then also that the teams were waiting. They would wait for me to actually rubber stamp it before they would keep going. So we had all this wait time for no reason at all. So we took it out of we still have exceptions, but we didn't put in this extra layer of approval because it wasn't adding value. And our testing results, even though we were doing the testing in this phase, it wasn't always, we couldn't stand behind the results. Often we would get back really poor performance results and we would dig in and it's like, oh, the environment's not configured correctly. It has nothing to do with our code. Or we'd get great results and we'd go live and we'd tip the site over. And it's like, oh, well, something's not right with our performance testing if we're not able to trust the results. And it was very manual too. So our intent was to take a week out of that hardening phase, which also meant we would get our 20% reduction in cycle time, going from 5 weeks to 4 weeks, get the hardening exceptions lowered, and really automate the testing, move it as far left as possible, and really have the feature teams accountable for their quality, because that was another thing we were doing. We were passing it off to a testing team instead of having it as part of the team that was doing the code. And then our production releases were a 2-day overnight effort with like hundreds of people involved, and it was painful. So like, we need to get it down to an 8-hour day so people can actually go home and we can feel good about deployment. So this is just kind of to show what we did along the way. I'm still okay on time, right? So originally, when we kicked off the value stream workshop, and this is another thing that I talked about at DevOps Enterprise, and if you get a chance to watch it or listen to our Goat Farm podcast, the dev manager of one of these teams co-presented with me, and he talks about his story. Because when we kicked off this value stream mapping workshop, I had 2 camps of people. I probably had 3. I had one camp that was very excited about it. They couldn't wait to do it. They were all in. And then I had a camp of eye rollers and, digging their heels in and like drag them kicking and screaming. And Jason, the guy who co-presented with me, was one of those people. Very skeptical, like, I already know what problems I need to solve. This is a waste of our time. And then I had the people kind of in the middle who I think just were like, well, I'll just do it because we're getting asked to do it. So by the time we got through the exercise, there were a bunch of like aha moments across the board. A lot of people had assumptions about why this was so painful. A lot of people thought it was someone else's problem. So this took the emotion out of the process and really made it about facts and made it visible. And I share a story too that the leader of our release team, he walks in day 1 of the workshop and he's got this Visio diagram. And he's like, I already know the process. And he like puts it up on the wall and everybody in the room is looking at it. And one member of his team is doing this. She's like shaking her head. And I was like, well, time out. I'm like, this person actually does the work and she's shaking her head. And this leader, to his credit, checked himself. He's like, oh my gosh, you're right. I don't do this job. And he sat down and she stood up. And then she put all the process stuff on the wall, and it made it real. So it's kind of an interesting window into how leaders show up in these workshops and how critical it is to really sit back, let the team own it, and let the team show the work that they do. Because, I mean, I don't write code. I haven't done it in a long time, so I don't know what it's like to sit down and do that every day. So it was very, very good. So anyways, we took our first experiment through. It was a big win, so it was very exciting. We removed a lot of hours out of the process and a bunch of the steps as well. Then we decided we wanted to break out into some subtracks and really gain some momentum. So we assigned leaders to each of these so we could get more traction on all those dimensions. We put in some quality gates to reduce those exceptions. This was our approach to, we only had a certain amount of runway left in the year. how do we guarantee that we can get down to the 4-week window? So we just took the remaining release cycles and started decrementing days so that by the end of the year we would be at the 4-week. And then all of the sub-track leaders did problem A3s. So if you're not familiar with the A3 problem solving tool, it's a lean concept. Really helps you ground yourself in what problem am I solving so that you don't jump to the conclusion without really digging in and knowing, like, okay, this is what I'm going to solve for. Here's how I'm going to know, and break it up in a way that makes it meaningful. So now we're at a point where we're down to, we've taken 3 of the 5 out, so we still got a couple days to go, and we continue to remove more hours out of the process. This is a visual of how we're doing across all the dimensions. So we track the overall effort and then how much it's taking to do perf testing, the deployment, how much is happening in the exception process and test execution. It looks kind of interesting because you could look at the perf testing one, which is blue, and say, well, you stopped doing perf testing? It's actually not what we did. We just ended up moving it to the left. We stopped having it be a gate for production, and we made it part of the day-to-day role of the engineers instead of it was a handoff to our perf testing team. And they would do all the perf testing, and then they would give back the results to the engineers. Oh, and we got the release process down to a single day, which is great. We just had a release last week. Team started at 9 a.m. and they were done by 5, and everybody goes home, and it's really good for morale and addressing burnout. So these are the outcomes kind of across the board for us as an organization. We've had a lot of behavior change. I talked about the Jason story. He's completely flipped over to understanding like what does this mean to think in this way and to not solve all of the problems for your team, but actually let them be part of that process. Our leaders are more engaged, not all, but the ones that are passionate about this are very engaged. Trust went up. In that mainframe example, we had a lot of low trust with our business partners because every year we would say, we're going to get it off the mainframe, and then we wouldn't do anything. And so when we went through this process, they actually came out with a lot of trust across the board because they saw evidence that we were actually going to do something about it, and they were really engaged. They were like, when are we doing the next experiment? I can't wait. We've got all these different problems we can solve, which is almost the ideal situation because sometimes it's challenging to get our technology organization excited about it, really challenging to get our business partners excited about it because it's new and it's just a different way of getting work done. Our team morale went up and a lot of personal development as well. The team felt like they were getting invested in. They see the evidence of the progress that they're making. They see the results. And so we ended up with that as well. I didn't include this in here, but I have a slide around the evolution of leaders in this context because I think it's so important to have leaders that are engaged, that are really honoring reality. It's really easy to kind of sit in if you have an office, if you're in leadership, if you sit and think you know what your teams do all day, but actually going and engaging and understanding it is a different mechanism for leading. And then being disciplined, it's really, I can't imagine doing work any differently, but it is hard. Every day I have to check myself because I'll try to go to problem solving mode without taking the step back and really understanding. And also using data. It's still not a strength of ours. We'll get the data, but really knowing what's the right question to ask and how to leverage it is still a challenge. So that is all that I had. You can find me on Twitter. I'll be around too if anybody has any questions, and thanks again.
So thanks, Courtney. So I wanted to ask you a question real quick. So one thing that you didn't really talk about too much, you definitely talked about the process of how you went through this optimization work. So talk a little bit about the culture and the culture changes that you've had to have at Nordstrom, because we do talk a lot about culture in the DevOps space, and so it's important to kind of understand how the process changes also have to map to the culture changes that you have to undergo as well.
Yes. Thanks. That's a good. I should have something in here on that. So a few years ago, well, let me back up. So the Nordstrom culture is very ingrained in how we operate. We have an inverted pyramid, so you'll always hear, like, I'll say, I support XYZ. No one ever talks about their titles. It's all about, like, you set your teams up, you empower them, and you let them solve problems. But the reality of it was, especially in technology, we were not really operating that way. We were operating in more of a command and control. So we went out, we actually visited over 50 companies, and Target was one of them as well. It's like, how do we shift our culture into one where we're really practicing empowerment and accountability and giving our teams meaningful work? How do we set our organization up to have a true engineering culture? Because that was the other change for us. When we stopped being so contractor-based, we couldn't keep the culture that we had. Because with the contractors, you can just give them orders, because they're not, I mean, most of them are not, they're not there, they're not expecting it either. Like, yeah. But our engineers are like, no, I don't want you to tell me what to do. I actually know what I need to do. I just need you to give me the context and tell me what I need to be operating under, and I can go from there. So we created some new programs too around, like, design thinking, and we have innovation boot camps, and we have hackathons, kind of trying to really up our game in the engineering culture space. But high degree of collaboration, not consensus, because that's something that we used to do a lot of, but we're trying to be a lot more clear around line of sight and helping the teams be successful. Does that answer it?
Excellent, thank you so much. Thank you, Courtney.